Welcome to the CoCheck webinar on delivering clean, green, healthier buildings. We're going to be discussing BREAM and WELL, which are both sustainability tools. Presenting today is Annabel Clark, who is an Associate Director in the Strategic Management team at Gould. Although most of us are familiar with BREAM, it has been around since 1990. Annabel will be discussing how it can be used effectively to deliver sustainability outcomes. Our second presenter is Rob Diamond, who is a Senior Associate with Ingleton. Rob will be discussing the WELL assessment. Following the presentation, we will welcome some questions from the audience. So I'm going to hand over to Annabel to start the first presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Annie.
Okay.
As Annie said, hello everyone. I hope everyone's got a sandwich to eat over lunchtime or a nice cup of tea. What we wanted to talk to you about today is how to use environmental certifications effectively. We want people to celebrate when BREAM or WELL or LEED or SCAR are put onto a project rather than groan and think, what is that? How is that going to add us value? So the presentation that I'm going to give today is on delivering clean, green, healthier buildings and using BREAM as a framework to do that. So what we want to do is to build back better with BREAM. We're all probably now aware of the government's agenda coming out the back of COVID-19. There's a huge push towards net zero carbon, towards sustainability, towards building back better, building back greener, and making sure that our new normal is sustainable. And BREAM is just one of those frameworks that can allow you to do that, covering sustainability in a holistic sense and help supporting the green recovery. Here in the UK, 40% of our carbon emissions come from the built environment. And that's why it's so crucial that we work out how to better deliver sustainable buildings, new buildings and existing buildings, retrofitting those buildings. You know, when we talk about net zero carbon by 2050 and other sustainable measurements that we need to reach, particularly in the public sector, where we're looking at biodiversity net gain, single-use plastics, waste and water, all of these are so interwoven. And we need to make sure that we have an effective framework for measuring and delivering sustainability in our projects. So what is BREAM? As Annie said, it's been around since 1990. Probably a lot of people on this call have already used it on a project or are aware of it. It is, in essence, a sustainability assessment and certification scheme for the built environment. It's operated by the BRE, so the Building Research Establishment. And BREAM is an acronym because the full name is the Building Research Establishment Environmental Assessment Method, which if we kept repeating that would be a bit of a mouthful. So it's known as BREAM or BREAM, depending on who you talk to. It's an independent third-party approvals body offering certification, in this case, on the sustainability of a project. But the BRE's aim is to protect people, property, and the planet. And that, to me, is what we see woven throughout the BREAM assessment. It's a framework, as we said. It's a means to an end. It's not necessarily an end itself. And I'll come on later in the presentation to some of those common complaints that we might hear from certain people around BREAM and how we can overcome those to deliver value to our people, to our property, and to the planet. So when does BREAM apply? Well, this very much varies on a project by project basis. It's very common that we get in the work that I work in. So I am a licensed BREAM assessor and advisory professional, and I will just touch on those. So there are two separate certifications that you can have within BREAM. So an assessor is in effect an auditor of the information that the team produce around sustainability, as the scheme is evidence-based. And an advisory professional is someone that has taken a further exam and is licensed to help advise the design team, the contractor and the client around how to better implement BREAM. And that advisory professional role is also included in the scheme and does provide you with additional credits. Now, one of the common complaints we get is that it's a tick box exercise. So what we certainly should not be doing is bringing on a BREAM AP just for those credits. It is to deliver that value, to work with the design team, to challenge and to look at other opportunities or lessons learned from previous projects. And what the whole process is trying to do is recognise and reflect the value in the higher performing assets and inspire and empower change by rewarding that sustainability across the whole life cycle of a project. There are different BREAM schemes. So there is BREAM new construction for our new buildings, which is currently on a 2018 scheme. We have BREAM refurbishment and fit out, which is currently on a 2014 scheme. There's BREAM international for any projects that we're working on a global basis. There's BREAM communities, and then there's also BREAM in use. So looking at a building once it's in operation, looking at how it continues to achieve the sustainability criteria that were set out through the design and construction. But what we're going to focus on today is the most commonly used BREAM scheme, which is the new construction and the refurbishment and fit out. And this runs throughout the REBA stages, as we know them, the REBA plan of works. So it's absolutely vital that we start BREAM, if that is the aim, to deliver BREAM or to deliver sustainability, whether or not it's BREAM that you're actually applying, right from that feasibility, REBA stage 0. Undertake that BREAM pre-assessment. If you're not undertaking BREAM, undertake some form of sustainability definition. What is it that your project wants to achieve? What are your key drivers? And what are the actual metrics around this? What BREAM gives us is a framework and metrics for delivering sustainability. Without this, you are at risk potentially of greenwashing because you're not measuring that continually throughout the project. And it's through BREAM, it's written into contracts, it must be delivered. We set that at the BREAM pre-assessment, so right at the start. We then work with, as an assessor or an AP, we'll work with the design team and the contractor, depending on when innovation takes place, between REBA stage 2 and REBA stage 4, to collect the evidence, commitments that what we are building will be sustainable and that we've chosen the most sustainable options. And then during the construction of a project, so REBA 5 and 6, when we're on site, making sure that that is actually delivered on site. And then at REBA stage 7, making sure that that building is operated as sustainably as possible. And there are key credits within BREAM that we can choose to deliver that value. So a key one there at REBA stage 7 might be your seasonal commissioning, making sure the plant and what you've installed is working properly. Your post-occupancy evaluation. Are things working? Should we be tweaking them to make sure they're working as the mechanical engineer, the architect, the contractor wanted them to? And is there something there around upskilling and making sure that we are using that building and it is fit for purpose? BREAM covers 10 major sections, which is how holistic sustainability in BREAM is measured. You can see those here with their weightings. Now, what you'll see is that there are 9 main categories, which in BREAM are called issues. And then the 10th category is innovation, which is worth 10%, but is kind of measured as a separate section in that for a project to achieve those innovation credits, you need to prove that this is something that is truly innovative and hasn't been done on a project before. So the main sections that we want to focus on are these ones down the left and right hand side. Here in the UK, our biggest challenges, as you can see from the weightings, are around energy and materials. Now, if you were looking at this on an international basis, you might well see water come right up that scale, where we have countries where there's water scarcity. But here in the UK, obviously, we at the moment, across the majority of the country, have an abundance of water, and it is energy and materials that are a key focus. But what's crucial here is that BREAM requires you to deliver requirements and value in each of these areas. And depending on the rating that you achieve, there are minimum credits in each of these sections so that you can't just pick the easiest credits. And what I'd encourage if we have clients on the call or local authorities, what we want to do is make sure, yes, it's a BREEAM rating that we're achieving, but we're maybe picking which credits pull out most of that value. So where we're talking about net zero carbon, and in particularly the last 12 months, we've seen a huge driver around net zero carbon. What can we pick out from that energy section to reduce operational energy and therefore operational carbon? From the materials section, how can we use that to drive net zero embodied carbon? So really picking those credits that align to you as a company and what you want to achieve. So how is a BREEAM score calculated? Well, each of those categories that we spoke about just now, so the management, health and well-being, etc., each of those have a weighting, and within that there are a certain number of available credits. As we've said, these credits are awarded based on an evidence-based assessment. So there are set requirements that need to be evidenced. A lot of this should be business as usual for your design team and the contractor, but there are some credits that will be an additional cost or additional scope for those individuals to deliver, or for additional consultants to be brought on board. But what we should be seeing there is not just the capital cost, but the whole life value that brings to the project and how that aligns with those outcomes. And so when we're talking about those drivers and outcomes, thinking about how BREEAM really integrates with other processes out there, such as BSRIA soft landings or government soft landings, for producing that golden thread throughout the project. And at Folan-White, one of the things we're really trying to do is embed government soft landings and BREEAM side by side to produce maximum environmental benefit for the minimum cost to deliver that fit for purpose building for each client. So it's the awarded credits times by the credit weight rating gives you that total score. And these are the scores that we're probably most familiar with. What is the BREEAM rating that your building needs to achieve? Pass, we get very few people, I guess, who go for that. If you're going for a pass, you probably haven't decided to do BREEAM. What we usually see is more in this very good, excellent and outstanding category. And increasingly, we're having local authorities ask for these ratings. So there's kind of a planning angle to this. There's then also a funding angle. We are increasingly also getting funding requirements that require projects to achieve BREEAM. And then the best of all is when it's a client aspiration to achieve BREEAM and to achieve sustainability. So these are the scores that you come out with at the end. So what do those really mean? And where does that sit you if you have achieved one of those or you're aiming for one of these? The picture in the background here is the Bloomberg office in London, which achieved BREEAM Outstanding. It was the top rated building for BREEAM at its time when it was constructed. And what that means is that an outstanding building puts you in less than the top 1% of UK new non-domestic buildings. So a true innovator. And you can see there that as you come down the list, increasingly there are more and more buildings that look that have achieved BREEAM at that level. It's worth noting here, of course, that BREEAM is just for non-domestic buildings. There is a comparable scheme, the Home Quality Mark, which is the successor for Code to Sustainable Homes, which encourages a very similar certification for residential properties. And then how does it apply to existing buildings? I think, we're probably most familiar when BREEAM is used in new builds, but it can also apply to refurbishment and fit outs. And it's a separate scheme that we measure against for BREEAM, for refurbishment and fit out. There are 4 parts to that, which you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. So these are fabric and structure, core services, local services, and interior design. And you can pick and mix these different parts. You can measure all of them. You can measure just one or even 1 or 2 of them, so that you are measuring sustainability on just the part of the works that you are delivering. But I think quite often, the challenge is that how do we write sustainability into a specification, into a project document? And what BREEAM does allow is a metric that lots of people understand. It's familiar to people. If you say you have a BREEAM certification, it's something that people are familiar with. And so using this for refurbishment and fit out is also a fantastic way of assessing and driving sustainability into a project. And of course, you know, our most sustainable buildings really in terms of embodied carbon are the buildings we've already built. And so this will become increasingly important in how do we make our existing building stock sustainable. So what is the value? Why do we do BREEAM? Why do local authorities ask for it? Why do funding requirements ask for it? And I think for me, the answer is that it's a framework for sustainability. Sustainability is so broad and people have so many different definitions for sustainability. You know, I think the kind of agreed definition, you know, is around the social, economic and environmental. But what do each of those points really mean to you? And this provides a comparable scheme and something where you can measure and quantify the sustainable value that you are delivering on a project. The aim, of course, through BREEAM is to reduce the environmental impact, to increase health and well-being, which I know Rob will come on to in his presentation, and how well really focuses in on that particular side. But, you know, BREEAM does also look at that within the rest of the categories. So looking at how daylighting, view out, thermal comfort can really make that space somewhere that you want to be, somewhere that makes staff want to come to work, want to work there, increases productivity, however it is that you're measuring that. But really all that we want is to make people happier in the buildings that they spend most of the time they're in. It's an international standard. So as we said, it's great for kind of if you are also using it from a reputational side and you want to tell the market about how you have incorporated sustainability, it's a good tool for that. If you use the credits correctly, it allows you to balance capital cost and life cycle value. And this is the key part. Credits aren't just for the requirements to meet that credit. We need to drive those reports and the spirit and the essence of BREEAM back into the design. So for those that are familiar, one of the credits is Management 02, which is life cycle costing at an elemental level and at component level. Let's not just do that report and pay a consultant and then put it on the shelf. That report must be used, fed back into the design team to see where those big capital costs are, but where those huge life cycle costs are in terms of replacement and maintenance, and see how the design team, with all of their expertise, can reduce that effectively. What we're looking for there, of course, is to reduce the operational costs and to quantify that so that we understand through post-occupancy evaluations and lessons learnt where we can reduce the carbon, but also the cost. And I guess those are the two key drivers here that we need to balance. And depending on, you know, a lot of this process is bringing stakeholders on that journey and speaking that language. So, you know, carbon equals cost and bringing those two together. In essence, BREEAM brings together an efficient building. To me, sustainability is efficiency. And so if we can do all of these, limit the risk, achieve greening government commitments, or if you're not public sector, whatever your private sector commitments are, and enhance reputation, but also enhance the leadership in how we deliver sustainability. I thought it was worth touching on how BREEAM interacts with other measurements that are out there at the moment. So Rob will obviously cover well, but there are lots of certifications out there and they each come with a slightly different angle. So for instance, LEED is an American version of BREEAM really. You've got SCAR, which looks at refurbishment and fit out. And the key thing for me is to look at the start. What is your driver? What is it that you want to achieve? And that will tell you which of these assessments fits well for you. And there's nothing to stop you doing more than one. It's just making sure that that is value for you and your company. But BREEAM specifically interacts well with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So these came about to look at how we can measure sustainability across the whole of the UN through these Sustainable Development Goals. And while BREEAM I think, touches on pretty much all of these. It really focuses on the ones that have got these yellow box around. So, you know, we're looking at that good health and well-being, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy. But I think what this shows is that it truly is holistic sustainability. And if you want to bring out one of these, if your company's sustainability strategy and roadmap is aligned to the SDGs, looking at how BREAM can help deliver that for you. And then there are so many other drivers for sustainability at the moment. So I thought I'd just touch on how BREAM helps deliver net zero carbon. You know, we've already mentioned the energy credits, looking at that operational carbon, the materials credits, the transport credits, looking at that embodied carbon, circular economy, talking about materials and waste and really driving those circular economy principles through that diversion from landfill. Health, so looking at the health and well-being credits and air quality, which will become, I think already has become increasingly important in a post-COVID world, looking at air quality and how that impacts us as individuals. The visuals, so the daylighting, natural daylight, your view out, and thermal comfort. There's nothing worse than being far too hot or far too cold in an office, and we all have different perceptions of what the temperature around us feels like. So how can we make that better for each individual? And encourage active and healthy lifestyles through transport, through access to green space. And then also the ecological enhancements. It's becoming so much, everyone's becoming so much more aware that biodiversity and green spaces play such an important part in all of these conversations. You know, our mental health and well-being, net zero carbon, carbon capture and storage. How can we drive that better and use BREAM as a tool to do that? Social impact, you know, we want to look at what impact our projects are having around the social side. You know, focus in on that sustainable procurement plan. Where are all of your materials coming from? How are you procuring those? And do you really understand, away from your tier 1 contractor, what impact that is having on the UK and on the wider world? Resilience, all of this is to do with climate change, natural resource depletion, looking at our future. And we need to look at certain credits like the climate change adaptation and future flexibility and functionality to drive that resilience. Natural environment, I think we've touched on in the health section around, you know, making sure we've got that ecological protection, but also enhancement. What can we do to actually drive that? Whether you've got a lovely building out in a rural location where you can have lots of green space, but actually, if you're in a city environment, that doesn't stop you. Think about that green wall or that green roof, or even an insect hotel brick, if that really is all that you can fit on your site. But every little counts. All of these small actions build up to a much bigger impact. And as we said, the whole life performance is absolutely crucial. So changing our language from not just cost to whole life value and what that means for each organisation. So the final part of my presentation here is touching on those common complaints. As you can probably tell, I do think that BREAM can be used as a framework for delivering sustainability, but it is not the end itself. It's just a means to an end. It is only a framework, and how you use that framework is really the value that it will give you. And I think it's probably true of most things, isn't it? What you put into it is what you get out of it. But we need to think carefully about what's going into procurement and into contracts, about how BREAM is used, and doing that upfront work to pick the credits that do drive value, maybe rather than just putting that rating in there and allowing people to choose the easiest credit. But the common complaints we get are understanding the value of it. There's so many certifications out there. Which one do I choose? It's just a tick box exercise. It costs far too much upfront. I'm not interested. And BREAM just seems to always extend my program because people are having to make that evidence. So my kind of takeaway from this is that BREAM can be a driver for sustainability. It's not the only way of delivering it, and there are so many schemes out there. But for any form of sustainability, early engagement is absolutely vital. And this diagram here on the right shows that. Sustainability isn't just your shiny PV panel on top of a roof. It starts right from Where are you going to put that building? What's the form of it? Which way is it going to face? And then looking at that fabric first approach, thinking about insulation and the passive design. And then finally, what are those active elements? You know, the things that I guess we traditionally associate with sustainability, the PVs and the heat pumps and the amazing technology, which is allowing us to be net zero carbon and more sustainable. But it starts right back from let's use less. And we can do that if we start early. So my final takeaway before I pass over to Rob is just how do we actually deliver that value? And these are the key 6 points for me. Focusing on whole life value from the start and look at what that is going to give you, not just looking at the capital cost. Understanding your project drivers will allow you to pick the right framework for you and the right metrics to deliver that by, and allow you to verify those outcomes. It will also allow you to bring those lessons learned into future projects that you're delivering. And that's the only way that we can have this continual improvement around sustainability. Identify experienced delivery partners. So whichever scheme you do choose someone that understands it and can help upskill the team and whoever it is that needs that design and understanding. And ask for value from it. I think, don't just try and do the minimum. If BREAM is required on your project, embrace it and see how you can get value from that. Allow time. And I don't think that this is just for BREAM. This is for all sustainability decisions. A lot of those huge decisions are done right from REBA 1. So make them and make them correct the first time. Let's not get to REBA 4 and realise it's not a sustainable building, not going to deliver what we want. And processes like BREAM and government soft landings and WELL will allow us to do that. Early engagement, which was the previous slide on its own and has to be the most important, start right from the start. Sustainability is right from REBA stage 1. And stakeholder engagement, bring everyone along on that journey with you. Which credits deliver value for you? And don't make that assumption, it won't be the same for anyone. So engage a BREAM assessor, if it is BREAM that you want to go down the route of, to help drive that value. So what I'll do now is I'll pass over to Rob, who will go into a lot more detail around how WELL can help deliver health and well-being in projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annabel, for that excellent presentation and that enthusiasm for BREAM. As a BREAM assessor too, I'm sort of wholeheartedly behind everything you've said. So just to re-emphasise, do chuck in questions into the chat box for Annabel and I to answer later on, whatever comes to mind. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about WELL, and again, I'll be sharing some slides. So if you like, BREAM is kind of like the godfather of the assessment field, and this is the Michael Corleone, the up-and-coming new way of looking at sustainability. And I recently qualified as a WELL accredited professional, similar to the advisory role that BREAM has. And again, it's quite exciting. I'm very excited by it, and I think it kind of really sort of brings in some of those elements Annabel spoke about, but kind of really brings in the particular aspects that are related to health and well-being, thus the name WELL, of course. So it's really about bringing buildings, organisations in to deliver better, more thoughtful, intentional spaces, purely focusing on human health and well-being. So WELL is precisely what it says, it's for people. So of course, we can end up spending a lot of money getting to net zero, but actually ultimately our energy costs generally are only up to about 3%, and operations vary up to 39%, but actually the majority of the money is going on salary, on benefits. So you want to keep your people happy, you want to keep them well, you want to keep them engaged. So similar to BREAM, it's got those issues that Annabel spoke about. WELL talks about them in terms of concepts. And again, I'll give a brief overview shortly of each of those concepts. So currently, WELL's the leading tool. It's very new, it's 7 years old, but it's probably the most solid, the most well-respected, You'll see some famous names in a little while who are promoting well. And yeah, it just carries a lot of clout, if you like. And there's a lot of research, a lot of development that's gone on behind the scenes. And even in these last 7 years, there's been 5,000 projects certified all over the world. And I'm going to just briefly mention the new health safety rating, particularly pertinent at this time as we re-enter whatever normal or the new normal is going to be. These are the concepts, and similar to BREAM, there's 100 features in this particular scheme that we're not obviously going to go through every single 100. But yeah, similar to BREAM, and again, you get points for each one. So where Well's focusing on, though, in particular, is about the body, the human body, what makes us tick, and it looks at all the aspects. So it's very much medically based. So I felt like I was doing an A-level biology degree while I was studying for Well, having to remind myself what the integumentary system is. Answers in the chat box. And like BREAM, it has certain things you have to do. We call them, in Well language, preconditions. So you have to do those, and then you can upgrade to get a higher Well standard. So the Well standards are for bronze, which you can only get for shell and core, silver 50 points, so half marks if you like, gold 60%, and the Well platinum, the much coveted platinum standard at 80 points. So that's a lot of effort. That's got to have massive buy-in. And to say on this point as well that Well can be used for shell and core. It can be reused for refurbished buildings, retrofit, and new construction too. So it really can apply to any scheme that you've potentially got. So let's look at these concepts in a little more detail. So 18 features, or if you like, 18% of Well is devoted to air. And of course, you know, air pollution contributing some £7 million premature deaths every year is a huge focus. And the air that we breathe, what is it, I think 17,000 litres a day, or some crazy figure that we're taking into our body. So it's critical, and therefore Well is focusing on that primarily, looking at things like filtration, looking at ventilation rates, ventilation systems, making sure ductwork and pipework are all thoroughly cleaned, and air pollution of any kind is essentially eliminated. So you're obviously not bringing in air from a car park, for example. So again, there's crossovers. You're probably, those that are more aware of BREAM are probably seeing some crossovers, but there's a real emphasis here on the air that we breathe within the building. Water is a huge feature again, second up only to Where in terms of order, although only 9 features are devoted to it. However, you need to get most of these features, and it's all about making sure people are able to access fresh, filtered, clean water, and they can get to it easily, so they're encouraged to drink, because actually the majority of people are spending most of their day dehydrated. And we've got figures from the US, but I'm sure, knowing what an office environment is like, how much tea and coffee people drink and how few glasses of water we see on people's desks. And dehydration has a massive knock-on effect onto all of us, you know. It can affect all aspects of health. We need fresh water. So the next area is to do with nourishment. So clearly this is only applicable where there is a food facility there, but if there is a food facility, there is healthy food there, and we want to encourage healthy eating, so promoting things like fruit and vegetable, obviously not promoting fatty based foods, making sure people are aware of allergens. So you get feature pass marks, if you like, for each time you do a particular thing on Well. And similar with like all the other Well features, somebody needs to go in and assess exactly whether this is being done, similar to BREAM, a post-occupancy visit by a well assessor. Light is given quite a lot of clout in a well, focusing both on low energy lighting LEDs, but also looking more at the circadian rhythm of the body, the light that naturally goes up and down as it called with how we're feeling during the day. So, you know, no doubt after lunch there'll be that instant slump. So perhaps we need the lighting to be ramped up, perhaps a bit later in the day too. And this is all to really focus on people and to make sure that they can get a good night's sleep actually. So we adapt to the natural rhythms of the human body, and hopefully then that can alleviate those that are suffering from sleep disorders, which is a huge amount in America, 50 to 70 million people suffering from sleep disorders. Of course, you couldn't really have a well standard without a focus on exercise and fitness. So this is very much about the organisation giving opportunities for employees to integrate a much more healthy lifestyle. So perhaps offering things like gym classes, Pilates classes, giving people things, benefits like wearables, decent healthcare. So yeah, I mean, it's been interesting, hasn't it, over the last year about how we've had to take it on ourselves, whether we are going to go out for a walk every day or have we ended up sitting at the desk working through lunch every day. So it's kind of like, well, if the facility's there, the theory is people will use it, and actually you can kind of build up a bit of a sort of well, a kind of community, can't you, of people? Let's all go to the gym at lunchtime. Let's all do the yoga class in the evening, for example. And it's, you know, currently shown that so many people do not get their recommended goals. And yeah, I wear a Fitbit, and actually 10,000 steps a day isn't always that easy. Similar to BREAM, and Annabel touched on this, didn't she, about thermal comfort. This is again about optimizing, making sure the HVAC systems are fully optimized, but actually in this respect, not necessarily just simply to CIB or ASHRAE standards, but to make sure it's better for the people. So it may, you know, in certain issues, we may look at increasing ventilation rate, for example. It may look into things like the whole type of terms of comfort of, you know, your seating. So sit-stand desks are a huge thing in well, and you get features to try and encourage people to be moving so that they're comfortable. There's even credits in there for encouraging people to take the stairs rather than taking the lift. And acoustics are again are a focus of well, trying to encourage places in the workplace where people can sit quietly, and people where areas where people can collaborate more fully. So you may have open plan spaces, you may have quieter offices. So yeah, one of the things that, you know, I've quite enjoyed around lockdown, working from home, is the quietness. And or if I want a bit of background noise, then I'm not going to bother everybody. So this tries to introduce that kind of philosophy into the workplace. So there may be an area where one can listen to music. There may be a place where one can just sit very quietly. Materials, again, is also covered in BREAM, but this is kind of again a focus on low VOCs, a safer environment using water-based paints, adhesives and so forth. So real, again, looking at the chemicals that we use, and not just in the construction, but because it's sort of suitable for retrofit and so forth as well. It may look at the materials that we use, the cleaning products that we use. So it all has an impact on potentially on human health. And finally, the last area is to do with the mind. And of course, we can't really just rely on people just being fit and well through physical alone. One has to look at the mind, and obviously things like ventilation, lighting and water, they all affect. But actually, what about our space? How about creating a well space that's creative, that's bright, that's light, that engages people? So things like biophilic elements like plants. So in a way, you go into a well building, you know it's a well building because they've got plants everywhere. There's a lot of greenery. There's a freshness in the air, a brightness in the air that is clearly going to engage employees and make people want to come. In a healthcare scenario, well, you've got to be a bit careful in a healthcare scenario, I suppose, because the patients may never want to leave if it's that great. So yeah, it's about encouraging people back to a much more productive, enjoyable, fun workplace. And this is the well concept in a nutshell. So these slides will also be available. So yeah, just to briefly mention, this very new, came out last year, well health safety seal. So obviously you've got some huge names here promoting that, and I won't show you the video because they simply say, you know, about using the well health safety seal a lot to encourage it, but it's all around COVID-19, or well post COVID-19, to give reassurance that people can come into their environment and know that it's a safe place to do so. So it's primarily focused on facility operations and management, and making sure, again, like all well, is evidence-based. And again, it focuses only on 20 features, and they've drawn from the research that Well's already been doing, but focusing primarily on cleaning, sanitizing, making sure there's preparedness in terms of potential problems, making sure that resources are available for when people go off sick, for example. Again, focusing on the air and water quality, and making sure that the stakeholders really engaged in getting people back to work, but in a skillful way. So just coming to the end now. So just to say, well is obviously much more focused on the health and well-being, and by doing so it focuses on things like nutrition and fitness, mood and sleep patterns. But obviously people want to see a return on their investment. They don't just want to necessarily apply well voluntarily necessarily unless they're going to see an output. So interesting, BREAM is usually a planning condition, so in many ways, or funding. People have kind of got to do it whether they like it or not. So well is purely voluntary. So you've kind of got to encourage people, because like all things, it's not a free trip. It is going to cost, but the outputs, the outcomes are quite incredible actually. So the global corporate headquarters in LA was the first commercial space. There's been a lot of research on that. And they're looking at 83% increase in production of employees, and 92% reported a positive effect on health and well-being. 94% claimed the space had a positive impact on business performance, and 93% reported easier collaboration. So this is what Well's all about. It's about making businesses more effective. It makes the employees more productive. So it's really making buildings better for people, which is what we're about. So there you go. Look forward to having some discussions.
Thank you very much, Rob and Annabel. That's brilliant. Fantastic presentation. I think we'll all agree on that. We've got some questions in the box. I'll just have a quick look through here. I think the first one will be for Annabel, which is, I think, what is the return on investment for BREAM?
And a question we get asked a lot, and I think a really fair question, in terms of if we are being made to do it or if we're choosing to do it, what does it actually give us? And I saw that question in the chat bin as we were going, so I've just pulled up a report, which if you want to look in more detail, specifically on BREAM, the BRE produced a report, I think 2 years ago now, and it's called The Value of BREAM. It's available publicly on the BRE website, but what that states there, and I'll just read out the final section, is that they found that an increase in capital cost ranged from 0 to 5%, and that was increased massively when you had a specialised building, so not a standard building such as an office or a school, but more maybe a healthcare building in a rural location. It becomes more expensive to achieve that. But the same research showed that due to the savings and operational costs, a 2% higher capital cost was paid back within 2 to 5 years, so pretty quickly. But my challenge to that is that return on investment, and the reason I used value so much during my presentation, is that I completely understand that companies run on money, but can we change that metric to not just being cost and thinking about the value that it brings? And some of that is much harder to quantify. So examples of that are around risk mitigation. So looking at actually, if you don't think about how that building's going to be used in the future, the flexibility and adaptability, think of that huge cost that you're going to have to do to knock down that building and start again, which of course we never account for, but that's what we're doing by delivering that BREEAM credit. And there's that amazing diagram that the World Green Building Council have as well, which shows that actually in a building, 1% is energy costs, 9% is rental costs, and 90% is our staff costs, which feeds brilliantly into what Rob's saying and the fact that it has to be our people. But if we make a building that is somewhere where people want to be, it helps retain staff, it helps the company attract staff, how do we quantify that in value in terms of, you know, the productivity, and actually putting a pound sign in front of productivity and happiness and how staff then deliver for a company. And then the final part was that reputation. So actually, you know, often these certifications are used for reputational reasons. We don't want them to be greenwashing, but we do want them to deliver value. And that's quite hard to put an actual pound sign in front of too, in terms of that attracting people to work with you, industry partners, showing what you're doing in the industry. So I think it's a fantastic question and a huge challenge back to everyone that works as a sustainability professional. And I think it's our responsibility to try and quantify that benefit and that value wherever we can. And the best way is through the life cycle costing exercises of a building. But I think it's not the only way we can quantify the benefit.
Excellent answer, Annabel. Thank you. I think we've got a couple more questions here. How does BREAM interact with net zero carbon? I think that one's for you again, Annabel, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. So BREAM in essence doesn't deliver net zero carbon, and net zero carbon has become such a hot topic. I mean, it's been around obviously for years and years, but in the last 12 months, it seems to be the front page of all of our newspapers, all of our strategies, everything that we're delivering for clients. And also, you know, I can speak personally, our company, obviously, everyone has a huge drive for net zero carbon. BREAM looks at holistic sustainability. So not just carbon alone, but of course, lots of the elements that we're looking at help drive net zero carbon. So I touched on a couple, but where you're looking at operation, so you've got operational and embodied carbon as your two separate sections. Of course, you want to look at whole life carbon, but if you split those down in the energy section, you're looking at operational carbon. And I guess this is where I'm talking about how you pick those credits. So the first credit in BREAM under energy is measuring your part L, so your building regulations of your regulated energy, which is a very small proportion of what your building actually uses. And so the additional credit that the BRE have now bought out is the E&E 01, the second part, which is looking at your TM54 modelling and how you can actually look at a prediction of operational energy performance. So helping, I guess BREAM is helping to drive some of those better behaviours through a design team and with the client to look at how that building will actually be used, because that performance gap is one of our biggest challenges for net zero carbon. And then embodied carbon, BREAM looks at this through the materials credits. So MAT 01 is looking at the impact of all our construction products. How that's done is through impact compliant software. There are lots out there, but one that a lot of people use is one-click LCA, and looking at what the impact is of all of those components that are going into your building. So where your insulation's coming from, and looking right back from where it's quarried, how did it travel to site, what impact is that having on our world, and measuring the carbon through that. But then I think if you look wider, you know, we're also looking at water consumption, we're looking at daylighting and not using artificial lights as much as possible. And all of this contributes to net zero carbon. I think the key thing for BREAM moving forward will be to try and look at more at that BREAM in use and how that follows through into when people are operating a building and how net zero carbon can be measured there.
Thank you, Annabel. I've got one for you, Rob, now this time. Will schemes require both BREAM and WELL? And can the schemes be combined?
Okay, so yeah, sure. Well, as I mentioned, BREAM is primarily planning funding requirements. It's not often it's voluntarily done. I think we've probably done about 2 schemes over the years. It'd be interesting to hear about Annabel that have been voluntarily done, maybe to try and promote a more green agenda for the client, more sustainable environmental agenda. But essentially, it's planning, bust the argument for it. It's just a tick box when that's not correct, but that is often the case. So well is entirely voluntarily done, and therefore it could be as an add-on to any BREAM scheme whatsoever. And of course, if a BREAM's done well, then obviously ticking the well box as well makes it much easier. But of course, well can also be done as a standalone process, depending on the organisation's requirements. So you could just do well on its own as well. But yeah, they're kind of geared up now more and more. I think probably the next stage is a real integration, because well integrates really well with LEED, and obviously they're both American-based standards, well and LEED, whereas obviously BRE global UK-based. So there is some areas that are probably a little bit, they're trying not to be, but there is maybe some crossover there. So yeah, I think we're looking for potentially an add-on to outstanding, excellent BREAM buildings. But yeah, as I say, well could be used as a standalone.
Brilliant. I think we've got one more question here. It's on what do you think about performance test timings? I think the concern between type between building completion and occupation. What would you advise?
So similar to BREAM, well obviously requires post-occupancy testing, and because there's different concepts requiring different areas, so like air testing would only need to be done once a year, so you might do that, you know, a couple of months into the scheme. You may want to get the performance testing of your restaurant straight away when it's up and running, so you get feedback on certain elements. So I would say on average you probably need about 4 tests per year for well. And just to say something I didn't touch on, that well you need to recertify every 3 years. So it's not a case of you tick the box, if you like, you get your well platinum and then you go back to normal, rip down the artwork, take out the plants and start serving Big Macs in your restaurant. You know, these need to be regularly checked over and made sure it's continued, and yeah, recertification over every 3 years. So yeah, in terms of the question, it does depend on how the well assessor is, you know, enabled to come to site. But yeah, you're looking at more visits, I would say, comparable to say a BREAM assessing standard.
I think we've got time for one last question, if that's all right. I think it applies to both of you. Are there any other certification schemes that we should consider?
Go on, Annabel.
There are loads of certifications out there, and I think for me it comes back to those drivers and exactly what Rob was saying. You know, they can be done in isolation or they can be combined, and while different certifications might focus in on one area, so well, you know, very much focusing on health and well-being, lots of those credits are still interlinked with LEED or with BREAM or whatever the other certification is that you're doing. So linking them is key. In terms of just a list, I guess in the UK, kind of there's lots and lots globally, but if we just look at the UK market and what I'm seeing currently in work, we're seeing a lot of BREAM assessments. We're seeing a lot of SCAR assessments, and SCAR is run by RICS, so the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, focusing just on the refurbishment and fit out elements. LEED, which Rob's mentioned, is kind of a US version of BREAM. It's very similar, but with different standards such as ASHRAE. We're seeing that, and that's particularly where you might have a client who's based in the US and has UK offices, but they want all of their estate to be comparable. Well, which obviously we've heard a lot about today, is a key one. Some requests in for Fitwell, which is a kind of lesser version of well, but focusing on health and well-being, but without maybe quite the same high standard of what you need to achieve. And then crucially, I think we've got lots of clients as well looking at their own bespoke sustainability standards and how they measure that themselves internally and make their estate comparable. So a huge choice out there.
Excellent.
Both so much for the presentations. I think we all agree they're really, really good. It's amazing to see how very, very similar the two tools are together, and considering that BREAM's been around since the 1990s and well is still fairly new at 7 years old, they're very, very aligned, aren't they? But so thank you again. And I think, Sally, you've got some parish notices, haven't you, for it?
I have, thank you. Thank you, Annie, Annabel and Rob, for a really great presentation this afternoon, quite insightful. In fact, just speaking of, purely from a Cambridge perspective across the arc, I think we have actually got a project being delivered by the University of Cambridge at the moment to the Welsh standard, so at number 1 Regent Street. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to perhaps showcase that a bit later on in the year as it progresses, which I think will be quite interesting. But in the meantime, just to let you all know the dates of our next event. So the 7th of April, we've got our next online construction networking breakfast, if you haven't signed up already. And on the 20th of April, we've got another webinar, which is on the significance of significance. Heritage and construction projects, and that's with some colleagues at Donald Insel Associates who'll be leading discussions on that. So do sign up now, otherwise thereafter the next one is on the 11th of May for online networking. So thank you very much for today, everybody, and we hope you enjoyed this afternoon's webinar.